Welcome to this Architecture Today webinar, Designing for Workplace Health and Wellbeing, with programme partners Geberit and Oscar Acoustics, and introducing your chair for this event, Architecture Today editor Isabel Allen.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on health and wellbeing in the workplace. It's obviously a particularly timely discussion, as so many of us and so many of our clients are grappling with very mixed feelings about going back to the workplace. We've got 5 presentations today. There will be an opportunity after each of them to ask questions. There'll also be a group Q&A at the end of the whole session. We might not get round to all questions, but we will follow up afterwards with any that we haven't had a chance to answer. So please do leave your email address. Right, to introduce our guests, they've all got very different expertise and very different perspectives to share. We've got Joe Hare, who's the director at White Red Architects, and he's going to present a series of projects that set out to change the way people feel about their workplace. Lynn Clapham-Carter, specification manager from Geberit UK, is going to explore the role of the washroom in the workplace. We've got Carol Costello, who's practice leader at Cullinan Studio. Carol's going to present a case study on the recently completed National Automotive Centre at the University of Warwick and explain how her practice put user wellbeing at the heart of the designs for that project. And Ben Hancock, Managing Director at Oscar Acoustics, who's going to share the findings of Oscar Acoustics' latest workplace noise survey. But first of all, we're going to hear from Dr. Chiara Amati, who's a chartered occupational psychologist at the Keele Centre. And she's going to set the stage for us by giving an overview of the factors that influence the way we feel at work. And she's going to look at the implications of some of the changes that have happened over the last year and a half.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you today. I thought I'd start my talk with you just giving you a sense of what it is that I do in my job. So, as was mentioned in the introduction, I'm an occupational psychologist or a work psychologist. And so I spend a lot of my time talking to individuals and teams about what they do and how they do it. I try to understand how work affects people's well-being, how it affects their health, and also how it affects their performance. And I really want to understand what are some of the risks in somebody's workplace, so whether they be physical, whether they be what we might call psychosocial or relationship-based risks, and what support is in place for them. And I'm particularly interested in how key relationships affect our well-being, including relationships within teams or with managers. So really what I've got for you today is a reflection on work well-being in 2021 and beyond. And what I mean by that is really to share with you some of the ways that I have seen work has changed in the last year or so since the beginning of the pandemic, and to think through what might the opportunities be in terms of work well-being, but also what some of the risks might be. So let's start to talk about well-being at work. So I've got a couple of definitions for you here on the slide. So what do we mean by well-being at work? Well, well-being at work is about a series of feelings, of emotions that we experience at work. And it's also about a series of thoughts or judgments. So when we feel well at work, then we have positive feelings about our work and positive feelings whilst we are at work. And we also have positive thoughts, positive judgments about the work that we do. So it's both emotion in a sense and judgment. We know that people feel well at work when they feel that they can achieve their potential, they can flourish. And we also know there's plenty of research to suggest that the way that work is managed and is structured, the job quality, let's call it, has a really strong impact, not just on productivity, but also on people's well-being. So for me, I always start by thinking about what are the core influences on work well-being. And I've simplified them here a little bit for you, but it's essentially 3. We talk about our work context. We talk about the influences of our home life, our kind of broader life. And then we talk about what we individually bring to work. So let's talk about our work context. There's a lot of research that suggests that jobs can have a substantially positive impact on our well-being, and we know how jobs need to be structured in order for that to work. We also know, you will be even more familiar than me with all the research on the work setting and how work needs to be set up, how workplaces need to set up to get the best performance. I have colleagues, for example, who are ergonomists who look at workplace design and how that impacts on safety as well as health. So there's features of our work, but there's also features of our home life. So what's happening for us in our wider life, our personal circumstances, it might be to do with where we're living, it might be to do with the support networks we have, it might be to do with other things that are happening in our life. We know that that also affects our well-being at work. And then finally, there are things about us. There are things that we bring into the workplace. So it might be our personality, it might be our ambition, it might be our skills, our coping strategies, and all of these will influence our work-related well-being. There's been a lot of attention to each of these factors individually, and I'll focus on the first one in particular in our time today. And so we know how each of these separately play, but in practice, in my experience as a psychologist, in practice, things are more complex and more dynamics, and all of these three elements will all come together to influence how we are thinking and feeling at work at any given time. And whilst it is useful to think about what is the most significant influence on our well-being at any given time, in practice, often that leads us to explore how, for example, our personality and our ambition is being fulfilled in a particular role, or maybe how something that is happening in our home life is affecting our ability to cope with pressures at work, or vice versa. So three broad categories that influence our work-related well-being, often talked about in isolation, whereas what we know is that these three will always work dynamically and together. So as I said, the thing that I think that I'm going to focus on today is the work context. And I've got three sets of slides. So first of all, I'm going to introduce you to a theory of good jobs, and then I'm going to talk through what some of the opportunities and some of the risks of hybrid working or of post-pandemic working might involve. So what you've got on the screen, the 3 C's of good jobs. As I said, lots of research that suggests what are the key ingredients that need to be present for us to do well at work, for us to feel fulfilled, for us to feel engaged, satisfied, and happy with the work that we do. Control, connections, and competence. I've simplified these as the 3 C's. So in a good job, we feel that we can exert a degree of influence over our work demands and the resources that we have available to us. We can have a bit of discretion. We can exercise discretion and autonomy in terms of what we do, how we do it, and when we do it. Control doesn't mean we have exclusive control or complete control over what we do, but that we feel trusted and we trust other people to be able to make decisions relatively independently where that is necessary. And in particular, control also means we feel that our work is not excessively controlled. So our work is not excessively measured, for example. We don't have somebody looking over our shoulder all of the time, which can make work a lot more stressful. For me, control is also about predictability. And so it's about feeling that we have a degree of control over our future. So a sense that we feel secure in what is happening and we know what is likely to happen next. So for example, if we look at organizational change, always seen as a real stressor, it's when we have less control over our future. The second C, really important, is connection. So part of what makes jobs good is the ability to access support from people around us, and accessing good quality support is something that will prevent ill health from becoming more serious. So it can help us to manage work-related stress. So in a good job, we access support from other people, we feel that we can provide support to others, and we feel valued as part of a team. We have positive working relationships with other people, and in particular with the people we have most day-to-day contact with, so our team and also our managers. And then finally, the final C is about competence. So in a good job, we use and develop our skills and our strengths, and we can do varied and stimulating work. But also competence is about more than just feeling competent. It's also about getting satisfaction from our work. So feeling that the skills and the effort that we are investing is meaningful, is important, and leads to something worthwhile. And also that we therefore receive fair recognition for our work. So let's have a look at what I've called the new normal. So what has happened in the last year or so is that where we work has changed, with lots of people working from home, and also how we work has changed, with lots of people working in this way, remotely, online rather than face to face. So I think it's quite interesting to reflect on how have these changes and how will hybrid working impact our relationship with our work. So first of all, I think it's about control. So we've had to live with a lot of uncertainty, and this will continue. And in particular, we have been told for a very long time that working in a communal workspace is high risk, so that we ought not to work in an office, we ought not to work with other people in the room, and that we should stay separate from other people. So this perception that actually office working is risky has really kind of started to take hold, and we will need to adjust out of this to be able to go back into working kind of face to face. Also, the fact that we're now working from within our home. So you'll see I'm at home, have been working at home since last March, means that our home space and our workspace have often become the same. Some people might have the luxury of having a spare room and a separate space in their house where they can work, but a lot of people will have been working in a room that was maybe also their bedroom, their kitchen, their dining room. I'm working in a room that is a bit of a hybrid with a study, but I've also got some washing hanging up. So it's a compromise. What this means is that our work has entered our personal space in a way that it will not have done in the past. And that means if there is something that happens at work that is more stressful, more difficult, then it will also affect our well-being, and it will stay with us for longer. But also the positive, if there's something very positive, we might be able to share it more with people around us. Connections and competence has been really impacted by how we're doing our work. So we've had to learn to connect on Teams. And what I'm hearing a lot of people saying is that actually connections on Teams have really facilitated task-based conversations, but they're not quite so good at the relationship building conversations. So whereas in an office, you might chat, you might go for coffee, you might see somebody as they're walking in and out of the office, you might hear a little bit about their day. That's much harder to do on Teams. So whilst Teams has worked really, really well in some respect, it is reducing what we talk about and how we talk about. And also the final point there, really important, people are becoming more isolated, and it's harder to really identify if somebody is well, is happy and is satisfied, or if somebody is under a significant amount of pressure, because we just don't see them as much. And what you might see is the kind of head and shoulders shot. You don't see the whole person. So it's become harder to identify who's struggling. And then finally, with the competence, I think it's become, there's now quite a lot of research about the fact that working in this way is tiring. Teams is tiring, we have Zoom fatigue, and it's harder to be creative when we have to look at ourselves, for example, or cope with our own image, and it's harder to be creative when we're doing things on Teams. So we've talked about some of the risks, but I think there are also really interesting opportunities. And again, I've talked about these in relation to control, connections, and competence. So working in a hybrid way, when we're working partly from home and working partly from a communal space, may become the norm. And it does offer greater flexibility in terms of working patterns and working times. Lots of people have benefited from not having to commute, for example, and have really felt that this has given them a chance to improve their work-life balance. And I think as long as we transition to a time when we genuinely have control of where we're working compared to what we've been living through over the last couple of years, when we have had no control over where we were working, we were told to work from home, then that does offer real possibilities in terms of people's well-being. Also, I think that whilst Teams does have limitations, actually, I found that workplaces have become more geographically neutral, and I know a lot of large organizations are considering their footprint and where they locate their offices. It also means that if you have teams spread across different locations, then how close you are to a main office becomes less of an issue. And what I've called geographical hierarchies within teams will be reduced. And so everybody will be, in a sense, kind of more democratically together. I think also connections have become a bit more agile and more flexible. People have really benefited from being able to attend training online, for example, for being able to do seminars. And so the way that we have learned and the way that we have adjusted to live with online technology has made us become more competent and has made us more resilient and more adaptable in a way that I think we never thought was possible in February 2020. So we're using technology to do more, and actually the technology itself has evolved to help us to do more. Where I'd like to end is to maybe have some kind of reflection points or maybe discussion points. I've called these reflections from a psychologist and to some architects. And again, I've split these between connections and competence. So I think in terms of the new normal, in terms of readjusting, I think the safety of workplaces will be really important. I think people need to understand how to be safe in their offices. I think this means that safety measures in offices and workplaces will need to be very clear and very visible, so people feel in control of the level of risk. So we're going from a situation when, if we're working from home, we control our exposure to the virus, and we have quite a lot of control over that, to going back into an office where we're handing over at least part of that control to the organization. So we'll need to make sure that how safety is being managed is clear and is visible, and that can be anything from making sure there are hand sanitizers everywhere, making sure that one-way systems are very clearly visible, putting up screens, all of the things that we're already starting to see around us. And that will help to a certain extent with some of the anxieties that people might feel about how will I keep myself safe if I'm out of my own working environment and into a collective working environment. I think this also brings about the fact that there has been a bit of a change, and the default might now be seen by people to be working from home. And so a readjustment and into working back in office spaces or to a hybrid way of working might need to be incentivized to a certain extent. Many of my clients tell me that they're struggling because lots of people now prefer to work from home and don't want to come into the office. And so they feel as though they need to make the office more appealing in order that people feel I can do something in my office that I cannot do from home, whether that is I can access certain technology, whether maybe your office is more luxurious than your home, for example. So it may well be that our office spaces need to change and become more like a kind of luxury experience in and of themselves, so that we're more incentivized to go back in. I think in terms of the design of the office, the really interesting thing for me will be how will our work activity change, and how will our office design change in relation to that? So it may well be that if hybrid working becomes the norm, we will automatically split between activities that we think we can do from home that maybe require a little bit more solitary reflection or concentration, and activities that we want to do face to face. And it may be that workplaces become almost exclusively dedicated to this face to face and group activities. So it might be interesting to think about, well, how can space and design facilitate these activities that cannot be done in any other place? And so the office design itself might need to be hybrid in order to match the kind of hybrid working that we are now starting to see as the norm. And then finally, and in some ways, I think almost more interestingly, most interestingly out of the three, I'm sure you will all be very aware that workplaces are more than just bricks and mortar. They're places of team identity. So when we walk into an office and we see even where the building is, what kind of building it is it modern, is it a traditional building, the color schemes, the furniture that was chosen, the office layout, they all tell us things about the company's values. They tell us about the company's ethos, their brand. There is a kind of corporate identity. I think a really interesting question is, how has that work identity lessened as we have started to work from home? And therefore, can office redesign reinforce our work identity and therefore incentivize us to go back to work and to feel that connection to something that is more than our individual tasks? So what I've tried to cover quite a lot is how work plays a fundamental part in our wider well-being. It's one factor, it's a significant one. I think there's a real potential to think about how new workplaces and hybrid working places can build on our mental health in the way that it's designed and in the experiences that we have, and how changes to work due to COVID, I think, present some risks, definitely, but also some really interesting opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gary. Absolutely fascinating. It's prompted some great questions. The first one is, how can the much missed water cooler moments be recreated in the virtual hybrid work setup?
I suppose a simple answer to that is with difficulty. So the water cooler moments are spontaneous. If we look at what typically happens, you meet people that you maybe weren't planning to meet. So you have more fortuitous interactions. You typically don't talk about workload, you talk about other things. So it's all of these things that are very difficult to replicate in a way that feels comfortable. I've known clients who have organized things like coffee roulette, which is when they set aside 50 minutes once a week and an algorithm decides who they're going to have coffee with. And that's trying to replicate that spontaneous, unplanned type of interaction. I think what you need to think about is, what are you missing? You're missing getting to know people a bit more, getting to understand them a bit more. And I think we all just have to put up with the fact that it's going to be a bit uncomfortable doing it on Zoom or doing it on Teams, but that it's important to do.
But I'm quite interested in the flip side of that, though, because you and presumably pretty much everyone involved in this webinar comes from a professional background that prioritizes creativity and collaboration and communication. And all the conversations I've been having with architects recently have been about the office becoming all about places where we can be sociable and we can be creative, and that you can do your own kind of private stuff at home, which is great. But presumably there are personality types and there are demographics that are living at home with a huge amount of interaction and stress, and probably more communications than they want, and would thrive much more in a more kind of anonymous corporate environment. Are those people going to find it really difficult to go back to this new social post-pandemic workplace?
So I think let's separate out two factors. So there is a personality influence on how we interact and the degree to which we interact, and also the degree to which we're comfortable sharing things about ourselves and our kind of private lives, let's say. And so there will be some people who might find water cooler moments a bit more uncomfortable, and people who will kind of thrive in these spontaneous interactions. So that's definitely a factor. But I think almost more importantly is the role of support. Other people play quite an important role in supporting our well-being. And yes, it's true, some people will get their support from home. Some people might get their stress from home and their support at work. So having those networks that are available to us and can provide us with that support is really important. The issue with people working from home is that often we don't know where their support is coming from. We can't see them. So a lot of managers of teams have started to talk to us about how difficult it is to know when somebody is not coming into the office and is okay, and whether somebody is not coming into the office and actually is finding that quite difficult and quite stressful. So there is something, I've even heard it referred to as the Medusa effect, which is that we find it difficult to relate to people that we only see in 2D. We find it difficult to relate to people that we don't see in a kind of full person. And I think over time, that might mean that our support networks become weaker, and that might affect our well-being more than the influence, say, of our personality and our choices. And then just the very final thing is, we have not had a lot of control over this. So actually all personality types have suffered from not being able to control who they interact with and how. And so now we're coming into, in a sense, a more positive time when we could regain a little bit more control. And you could talk to your manager, to your peers about, what do I feel comfortable with? How do I think I do best?
Okay, that's a really good answer. We have more questions, but we're going to save them till later, because now I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Ben Hancock from Oscar Acoustics, who's going to talk us through some of the issues relating to noise and acoustics in the workplace.
Thank you. A couple of years ago, we commissioned the Big Oscar Acoustics Workplace Noise Survey, which gave us some truly fascinating statistics, including if you're a male millennial from London, you're around 30% more likely to resort to physical violence in the workplace as a result of excessive noise. This is around 40 times higher than the same person living in East Anglia. A lot's happened, though, in the last 2 years, so we thought we'd do another survey. to find out what preparations are being made for the reconfiguration of workspace, also identifying what potential design challenges architects may face, and see how it will be able to adapt to the hybrid workplace of the future. In particular, focus on the acoustic quality of these reimagined workspaces and how this may impact employee welfare, as well as fit out limitations and adhering to new COVID-19 safety measures. And I'll be sort of putting some of these findings throughout the presentation as well. As before, please keep an eye on my LinkedIn and Oscar Acoustics YouTube channels for the full and complete results. So, unsurprisingly, JLL say that there was a sharp fall in leasing volumes last year, and although they remain subdued, they're seeing promising signs and expect a strong second half to the year. They say that offices will become more social, collaborative and tech-enabled to inspire employees and customers to occupy them. There's also a heightened focus on higher quality core product. According to JLL, the 3 priorities for employers are: define and develop your optimal hybrid working model, support the shift in working behaviour, and create a dynamic office layout that maximises for each person's contact whilst accommodating a variety of uses throughout the day. The new normal is an always-on operating model that will keep adapting. So how can acoustics help? Most offices are not set up to have multiple people with raised voices on Zoom calls, so naturally some are going to stay at home because it's easier or because they don't want to disturb others. This in turn can reduce the social and therefore collaborative elements though. There was a great piece in the Times a little while ago, and some may call it very hot news, where Tom Whipple interviews British designer Thomas Heatherwick. He was saying that middle-aged, comfortable people living in their home working suburbs bubble are getting a touch on the smug side, no longer having to smell the armpits of fellow tube travellers and dropping the kids off at school in their pants. The danger for smug middle-aged people is that if they think they don't need to come in, they become less relevant, he says. The pulse of organisations will be about the younger people who come in together and learn together and from each other. So when talking in an office space, how easy is it? Do you have to raise your voice on a call above the sonic battleground around you? It can be exhausting and stressful, just like the summer's day commute on the underground. It's just as bad, if not worse, to be sat amongst it whilst trying to concentrate on something else. Despite this, our survey says that just 9% of architects say acoustic design is given the attention it deserves, despite the health risks caused by excessive noise. Noise pollution is a serious problem. So the chief medical officer in England, who's a lot more famous than they were a couple of years ago, say that it's second only to air pollution in damaging public health, while the World Health Organization, WHO, highlights issues such as tinnitus, sleep disturbance, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, adverse birth outcomes and cognitive impairment in children, not to mention general stress. Almost half of architects, 42%, say clients aren't interested in the end user health despite offering guidance, which is short-sighted, as according to the HSE in 2019-20, stress, depression and anxiety accounted for 51% of all work-related ill health cases and 55% of all working days lost due to work-related ill health. And that's before you add in other risks that WHO listed out. And this tallies up nicely with the previous employee survey with exactly the same percentage, 42%, saying that employers don't take it seriously. And 54% said their employer had taken no action to combat it. So what's the biggest issue when it comes to convincing a client to introduce acoustic products? 67% of architects cite small design budgets as their biggest design challenge to noise reduction in the workplace. But perhaps some are not looking at the complete picture. If you were to take the cost of preparation and decoration of a surface away from the cost of treating with an economical acoustic decorative spray instead, it starts to put things in perspective, especially when taking into consideration the benefits and savings in reducing employee sick time. And it's not just for decoration and acoustics, it's pretty forgiving and allows you to refurbish old surfaces like concrete and rough plaster as well. So inadequate budgets and inflexible existing finishes are stated as design challenges faced by 40% of architects. Cementitious fire-coated beams are a common one, as they're usually applied, knowing they'd be hidden behind a suspended ceiling and not left as a finish. The good news is that the Sonar Spray is the only acoustic system to have been assessed by UL, the US testing body, as suitable for use on a cementitious fire spray. So it's ideal for refreshing and acoustically treating at the same time. Intumescent paint are also a common one, shown here in black at Gensler's London office on the beams there. So we spray up to the steel, neatly edge the material, and then lever it back in a V shape. The Sonar Spray is superb in a fire, so leaving it away allows the flame to get to the intumescent so that it can do its job. It needs to char. And well, here's a closer look, the white Sonar Spray up against the black beam there. Of course, social distancing is also a concern, but many offices don't lend themselves to easy reconfiguration due to partition walls surrounded by tile ceiling grids. Nearly a third of architects, 29%, state that limited space is the main preventative to social distancing. Some might argue that there's no better separation than a wall, but this is only an option where space allows. In removing these suspended ceilings and partitions, you're creating extra room and volume by going full height and giving significant dilution, as well as a feeling of space for the employees. Imagine if treating the soffit like the sky and designing your perfect outdoor workspace, a little like this example we sprayed in blue. Apart from the outer walls, nothing actually touches the soffit. You might have desks or seating in the open, some enclosed seating areas under cover, and pod-like structures for meeting rooms or enclosed offices. We're seeing this more often, and it really lends itself to complete workspace flexibility. None of this is interfering with what is above, so it can be moved or replaced at any time to suit the current needs of the occupier, who may need to adapt and adapt again in this fast-changing world. The Sonar Spray is also untouched and ready for a change of tenant as well. This is another reason why we're seeing an increase in us spraying entire buildings. Depending on the project, we can spray up to 1,500 square meters per team. We've just completed a 17,000 square meter office building in Glasgow for Gensler and ISG, and had 7 teams working all at the same time. So there's nothing that can acoustically treat a building faster. The saving is not just in the material rate, it's the huge time saving in program as well. So all our products also add value to the property by having great environmental credentials. It's made from recycled paper, but it's treated to achieve Class O and BS1 D0 fire rating. Contributes to BREEAM LEED, SCAR, Living Building Challenge, etc. And the emissions credentials as well. It's M1 classified as a low emitting building material, which is the best you can get. And the California Department of Health, Green Guard Gold, BREEAM's indoor rating, and so on. as well as contributing to many of the well building standards sections as well. It's actually been used in Well's own building, and of course that was built to the very highest standard of well as you'd expect, and the product was deliberately chosen to fit with that. So I refer back to some useful pre-COVID JLL data. Green offices are more likely to bring in a rent premium and less likely to sit empty. Buildings with BREEAM very good or higher certifications saw a rental premium of 8%. London developments with BREEAM outstanding or excellent ratings experienced vacancy rates of just 7% within 24 months, in comparison to those rated very good, recorded vacancy rates of 20%. So Oscar Acoustics are also now ISO 14001 certified, which has been really hard work, but well worth it. We've had to make loads of changes, but also it's just helped our client achieve the maximum BREEAM points on their projects. Now, one recent project that's done everything I've spoken about so well is Herbal House. You might have seen this one in the press. Architects T.P. Bennett creating this beautiful Manhattan loft-style office. Working with the contractor BW experts, Oscar Acoustics applied 16 millimeters of Sonospray K13 in a mid-grey colour directly onto the concrete slab throughout the project. You may remember this photo from earlier in the presentation. This is what Herbal House looked like before the application. So yeah, massive difference. Central to achieving their goal of creating a tranquil office ambience was the issue of noise reverberation. It was imperative that the workers could communicate easily without needing to shout, and that staff could work harmoniously without distractions. The client needed to allow for agile ways of working, providing flexible environments that offer focus, work zones, co-working spaces and relaxed breakout areas. A combination of both impromptu and formal meeting rooms were also required. A library was also installed as a useful resource and social hub. A stunning building and one worth looking into more if you haven't seen it. There's been some great articles written on it. Now, it's easy to forget that we do a range of 5 finishes, this being the next finish up, Sonospray K13, which is tighter in texture than the one you saw before. And then Sonospray FC was the finest non-troweled finish in the range. And Sonospray FCX is sprayed and troweled to give a beautifully versatile flat and pitted surface, a little like a pre-coloured render, and often appearing as plaster when used with downlights. Oscar Elite completes the range and is the smoothest acoustic plaster on the market, appearing smoother than painted conventional plaster. So we do projects of all shapes and sizes. And to finish up, here's one last pretty photo of our acoustic plaster at Four Seasons, Trinity Square, London. Acoustic consultants on the project, Clark Saunders, said that on the opening night, the acoustics moved the jazz band to tears, and said that they had never heard themselves sound so good. So quite a compliment there. Thank you all very much. Please do follow us on our social media channels or send me a LinkedIn invite. I'm Ben Hancock, to see our projects, blogs, and also the survey results as well.
Thanks, Ben. Some really interesting advice for architects and people trying to make environments with good acoustic conditions. But I have to say I was quite shocked by the revelation that so many clients are not interested in end user comfort and by implication acoustics. And I suppose part of the reason for that is we're so used to communicating architectural ideas visually. So what would your advice be to architects who are trying to convey to clients the importance of acoustic environments? What are the tools they can use to start that discussion?
I think it's a case of convincing your client to look at the big picture. not just what they're spending whilst having the project built. You do have to, I mentioned in the presentation, that you do have to look at the offset. You might have that space decorated, but if you can offset that against the cost of an acoustic finish, not all of them are completely smooth and fancy like the Oscar Elite. You know, if you can go for one of the economical finishes, actually, by the time you factor in people being off work, it's not quite as bad as they think. So I mean, financial is the biggest issue.
Okay, we're going to save the other questions until the end, because I'm going to move on now to Carol Costello, who's a practice leader at Cullinan Studio. She's going to talk to us about the National Automotive Centre at the University of Warwick and explain how Cullinan put well-being at the heart of their approach to the design for that building.
Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today about our project for the National Automotive Innovation Center. The building is also known as the Lord Bhattacharya building. Lord Bhattacharya sadly passed away about 18 months ago. But he was the founder of the Warwick Manufacturing Group and a champion for many projects at the university, and including this. He did live to see it finish, but died shortly before the building opened. However, National Automotive Innovation Center is a bit of a mouthful, so I call it the NAIC. And everybody who's ever worked on it calls it the NAIC, and I think people at the university call it that as well. So I'm going to call it the NAIC as we go forward. So just to give you a bit of overview about the project, the NAIC is driving the future of the automotive industry from the heart of the United Kingdom. It's a beacon for automotive research. It brings together the brightest minds from industry and academia to develop new approaches to smarter, lighter, greener transport and deliver the skills required to keep the UK globally competitive. NAIC is a partnership between Warwick Manufacturing Group at the University of Warwick, Jaguar Land Rover, and Tata Motors UK, with funding from these partners and the UK's government's Higher Education Funding Council. The client partnership brief was to create a collaborative environment for their research groups that would have the time from idea to production. The 33,000 square meter building is the largest research center of its kind in Europe, and it's home to 1,000 staff working across design, engineering, and research, as well as future engineers on degree programs. So I wanted to just focus on 7 key points today. The building, we worked on it for over 10 years. With a cast of thousands, really, including everybody at Cullinan Studio, the contractors team, the other engineers at Arup, and so forth. So it's a long story to tell, but I'm going to try and keep it focused on these 7 points, which are about how we consulted with the end users of the building and our response to that. So the first one is understanding the culture. It's fundamental to build a relationship of mutual trust where anyone participating in the engagement process can contribute ideas or challenge others. And we find when we meet with all the variety of people, and there was over 100 people consulted for the briefing process of this, that change can be scary. Some people can feel threatened or suspicious if they're not in the sort of management or steering group. And we found some views that surprised us. One of those being talking to the engineers, who were mostly men, there were some women. They were really worried that we were going to impose a kind of crazy Google type office where everything's provided for you, provided you never go home and you work all hours of the day there. And others saying they'd actually prefer to work in a 1970s style cubicle where they didn't have to interact with anyone and they could just focus on what they were trying to achieve. So I think what we learned from this was the cohort of people working in the building and the kind of culture of the industry was they want to work really hard and effectively together, but they want to go home at the end of the day. So everything about the building we knew needed to kind of fulfill those needs. But alongside having a very kind of empathetic antennae in all these consultation meetings is a very practical process of mapping out the briefing. So because we had so many people from different organizations and different departments doing different types of activities in the building, we developed a methodology which included individual interviews, peer group workshops, getting them to do creative tasks, building visits, super important, and even town hall presentations where anybody who might not have been in the briefing process could come along to a big presentation in the lecture hall and tell us what they think. And that usually was followed up by lots of emails as well with you know, sometimes quite tough questions, but all of that really helped us to kind of hone the design. I'm just going to go through a few slides which kind of showed what the issues were that we observed when we were doing the consultation with them. And these are images of the existing workspaces, I think for Jaguar Land Rover, in spaces they were working at the university. So you can see the desk layouts were very cluttered. There's nothing kind of groundbreaking about that. Noisy, wrong kind of storage. But, you know, people also saying, you know, there's a buzz about the place and they liked that. So they wouldn't want to lose that completely. Meeting spaces are super important for them, but also places for pinning up. They talked about a never-ending whiteboard being something they would like, having components nearby that they'd be working with. A lot of people had these sort of Heath Robinson type situations next to their desk of small electronics and tinkering, and then actually quite substantial sort of tinkering setups in like closets next to open plan desk spaces, which actually kind of contravened some health and safety issues. But it was really important to them to blur the lines between a conventional office type desk and the sort of workshop areas that they needed to use to advance their work. And then there's also the, you know, the other social side of it, and different parts of different organizations were better at this than others, but there definitely was a really great culture of pizza parties, samosa parties, and they wanted that kind of space. They had these high white tables in one of their existing buildings, and they said they wanted to keep something like that in the new building where they could get together easily, either for social reasons or for quick informal meetings. And JLR in particular had an annual egg race every year, and that they said this was a dangerous thing for them because once they gave the brief out to the employees, they'd spend all their time thinking about this. They'd make some sort of contraption, engineering contraption, and they had to, you know, transport an egg across space. Sometimes they had to do weird things like be able to crack it and fry it and all sorts of things, and then return, and there was a race to do that. So that was an annual event. They needed space for that to happen. And meanwhile, there's all sorts of specialist space in the building, from clay modeling, dynamometers, design studios, engineering hall that needed absolute precision, attention to detail and briefing. And quite importantly, the need to protect intellectual property meant there was a deeply embedded culture of secrecy. However, that was also seen to potentially hinder collaboration. So second point was make space work harder. This project actually started out as 2 buildings, and then over the development, working with the partners, they could see the value of working under one roof, but they still wanted all their kind of private spaces. And we, through testing ideas and demonstrating to them that actually you could share a lot of the space, and that would foster collaboration and innovation while keeping the minimum of the kind of private, secure spaces. So what this led to was a building organized around a collaborative hub, and that's this kind of dark orange space, but it also includes some of these kind of foyer yellow spaces. And it's a building over 4 floors, and it's got a very dramatic staircase that leads you up to the main car showroom, and there's actually an outdoor terrace for viewing vehicles up there as well. And then all the engineering spaces, and that includes engineering hall, design studios, virtual reality suites, clay modeling, paint shops are organized around the sort of northeast, and research offices, all the kind of people spaces organized around the southwest of the building. So this view kind of shows, imagine all the office spaces taken off the front here. This shows the collaborative spaces of the building over 4 floors with those specialist engineering spaces behind it. And you can see we've got a frontage to the south here, which is populated by a cafe that's used by the whole university, a foyer with many uses. I'll talk about that in a bit later. There's exhibition spaces and student exhibition spaces. And then we've got outdoor terraces facing south and west on the building. So another key point is make room for nature. This is a fundamental philosophy at Cullinan Studio, and we think we're experts at integrating nature. We had to do that within the university campus. And as I said, we've worked here for over 30 years. We're used to engaging with the master plan for the campus, but we knew when we started this project, it was an opportunity to solve some long-standing problems on the campus, and that was, links between key parts of the campus, this academic area here and the university house, while also creating a front door to the campus. So we wanted to make an entrance that was welcoming, green, and also had outdoor spaces that people could enjoy. And bring more nature into the campus. I think if anyone had used that campus, if any of you listening had used it, you could see that it was very much car focused, car parking garages. And if you were a pedestrian, the routes weren't that legible and not that pleasant to use. You really felt you were on narrow sidewalks with traffic moving past you. The new building really changes that. It's a really significant change to the campus master plan. And here it is completed. So you can see we've got quite a wide route with new landscape, water feature, and a south-facing terrace outside the cafe. And just again, to show you that there are roof terraces that we've designed as well for anybody in the building to get up at a higher level and use that for outdoor meetings and relaxation. Another point, use timber where we can. We're experts in designing with timber, but we also know that it has lots of benefits. And this roof is actually one of the largest, or if not the largest, glue lamin CLT roof in Europe. and it spans over the collaborative spaces and also over the office spaces in the building. The use of timber, we know, also promotes well-being, and we've been part of Trotter Research for a long time, and they've produced new evidence to help support this. So if you're trying to convince any clients of using timber in their buildings, there is now evidence of how it promotes good health and well-being. So the building as well, I would say, using timber, even though for this project, from the date of its commission, it didn't have net zero targets. But if you were building it today, timber would certainly contribute to lowering the embodied carbon of the building. And we use it both on the roof, but also in the walls of the building. They're actually constructed what they call a mega panel, which are CLT vertical panels, which then have the cladding attached to that. And it's all very precisely engineered, fire engineered, et cetera. And timber, you know, there's a timber handrail that goes all the way through the building, you know, recognizing that timber has a lovely touch quality, and it's a kind of used very effectively in terms of the interiors. Another issue I wanted to, or a method that is wanted to talk about is how we tested scenarios. Obviously, there were lots of specialist spaces in the building, but I'm just going to focus again on the collaborative hub and the foyer and how we created these type of drawings. This building was highly visualized. We were working with the auto industry, who are used to kind of immersive techniques for viewing automotive design. So very demanding in that way, but really a great opportunity for us to really immerse ourselves in visualizing the project. And this just shows one area where we're looking at the foyer and how it might be used for different events, which had a big impact on how we specified the lighting, the power, the audiovisual, all the furniture and equipment to kind of imagine these scenarios. And I'll show you the building in use as we get towards the end of the presentation and how this actually played out. And in other areas, you know, we're looking very closely at how the breakout spaces and suites of meeting rooms would be used, but also thinking again about the cultural side of things. And I said, you know, they have an annual egg race at JLR, and we had to make sure the furniture could be moved and cleared so that this space could facilitate that annual event that's really important to their culture. So just an idea of some of the quality of visualization we were preparing through the whole engagement process. And, you know, these were really necessary for gaining approval with the leaders from Tata, JLR, the University Warwick Manufacturing Group, so that, you know, they could have faith and consensus that the design was going to be that of the quality that they demanded. And we looked at everything in detail and visualized all the furniture and equipment in these spaces. And planning for variety. I know in workplace design, this has, you know, become super important. And we weren't, the building isn't well certified, but definitely we were referencing different research from the World Green Building Council and from the WELL standard to kind of support design decisions and also make the case for it. If any of you have worked on university projects, you may have found that the building is designed and then the estates department might do a very matter-of-fact type fit out using you know, their supply chain to provide, you know, what seems, you know, perfectly fine and functional furniture. But quite often we've found that that's been disappointing, and then, you know, you get problems and people complaining that spaces don't work for them. So we we engaged in a really detailed design and selection of furniture and finishes. And actually, this was a joy to do with the auto designers, because that's their thing, looking at finishes and interiors for automotive design. So we had a really fun and creative process doing that with them. And we were able to produce a whole range of spaces, from open plan offices to breakout spaces for big groups or small conversations, and really have a kind of palette of materials with this big timber roof overarching, but keeping these cool, sweeping white lines and then splashes of color on the furniture. That was, you know, we spent a lot of time coordinating all those finishes to give a really good, positive look and feel, and make particularly the collaborative hub an attractive place that people will want to come and get out of their 1970s cubicle and collaborate and meet with people. And also, you know, fantastic design studios. And then, you know, we're only allowed to show a few images that are vetted by the partners here, because these are the kind of areas where there's more secrecy around what they do. But there's a high amount of precision detailing to make sure the floors are perfectly flat and free from vibration, and the lighting levels are absolutely perfect for the work they have to do in these spaces. And the last point I wanted to make was about measuring and learning. So the building's finished, and we are measuring the embodied carbon and the operational energy use. And we're continuing to do this with the client. I would say the building opened just before the COVID pandemic. So we've had a strange break where it's been empty for a while, but we've got very good relationship with the client, and we were able to do an initial post-occupancy evaluation before that lockdown happened. And I think we'll continue to do that with them. So it's really important for them and for us to learn how the building's performing and how it needs to adapt to changes, particularly post-COVID. And also we're looking at the kind of social value of the project. RLB were the project managers for this, and they've done a whole social value report looking at the wider benefits to the community that this building represents, so people can see that social return on investment. And just to finish, I'm just showing you a few shots of the building in use. And a lot of this was just before lockdown. I mean, sadly, Lord Bhattacharya passed away, but there was a fantastic banquet in that space, which we tested to see if it could function as a banquet in his honor. There's a lot of outreach that the partners and the university do with local schools and apprentices, and it's held was able to hold some fantastic events for them. We had the Prince of Wales opening the building shortly before lockdown, and people gathering around the balconies at all levels to enjoy that. And here's the Prince actually getting inside one of the design studios. So we're thrilled to see the building being flexible and adaptive for all these uses. And really keen to get back up there and do some more research with the partners and the university. So that ends my talk, and happy to field any questions in the panel discussion.
Thanks, Carol. That's brilliant. We have a whole clutch of questions coming in, mainly focused actually on the tension between kind of collaborative space and private workspace. So I'm going to go with this one. If you make workplaces too focused on collaborative design layouts, isn't there a danger that work doesn't actually get done?
Depends on what you define work as. And I think that's something we all struggle with a bit. Like if you're not at your computer or whatever it is you're doing, creating something or writing something or doing some analysis, you're not working. But actually we know, and the engineers know this as well, that if you don't get out of your cubicle or your bubble and discuss ideas with people, you don't spark innovation. So it is those chance meetings, the water cooler moments, or some more organized social events that really do, spark ideas and cross-fertilize ideas.
Okay, so on a related note, I've got somebody asking whether you've had any post-occupancy feedback yet on the way those communal social spaces are being used.
We've had a whole post-occupancy study with a variety of feedback on office spaces and communal spaces as well. Generally, again, because I didn't think we ever got the building to full capacity before lockdown, and then things have changed again, but generally very positive. Acoustics are very good in the building. We are especially proud of that and working with Arab Acoustics on that. So I think it's a bit of a journey, and we're going to have to keep speaking with them as everyone's returning back to their workplaces.
And we've also got a couple of questions about CLT. So people are asking, are there any issues in the use of CLT wall panels under the current fire requirements in relation to cladding?
Yes. I think everybody's finding they can't do what they used to do. And if we were designing that building right now, potentially we might have some issues, but it is not a residential building, for one thing. So any architect knows the kind of nightmare of insurance, et cetera. So I couldn't guarantee if the building was being built now, whether we'd be able to use the same design.
All right, I'm going to move on now to our next speaker, who is Lynn Clapham-Carter from Geberit. And Lynn's going to talk to us about the importance of the washroom in the workplace and give a few pointers as to how we can make sure it enriches the well-being of people at work.
Today, we're going to consider the role that washrooms play in the workplace. If we cast our minds back to March 2020, for many of us, the prospect of remote working promised a shift towards a better work-life balance. And I'm sure that many of you will remember lots of column inches written in the media about the positive impact that this would bring to staff well-being. Back then, many people were also openly questioning the role of the office at all. Fast forward to today, and the role of the office in our lives certainly hasn't died a death at all. Rather, it's evolved. We commissioned our own research in conjunction with YouGov earlier this year to find out how office workers view the role of the office in their lives. This survey comprised 1,000 office workers and was undertaken during the third lockdown period in March 2021. It produced several very interesting findings. The first was, rather than home working providing this perfect work-life balance, 42% of the respondents felt that they were unable to actually achieve this. They had children at home having virtual lessons, partners working from home as well. There was no space for everybody to function properly, and many others felt very isolated and extremely lonely. Our findings also reinforced just how important the office is for collaboration. More than half of the office workers polled by the YouGov survey cited socializing with colleagues as the aspect of their job life that they missed the most during the lockdowns. What we also found was that whilst more than 75% of the workers were more than willing to return to the office, there were some reservations. The staff toilet or the communal washroom was the biggest area of concern. And over a third of those surveyed were concerned about the standard of the washroom hygiene, with many worrying about the cleanliness of the surfaces and all the touch points within that space. With the washroom area being the single biggest area of concern for our respondents, employers must, of course, consider the hygiene aspect and how this can be maximized in these spaces. But perhaps even more importantly, they need to consider the role of the washroom in relation to the employee well-being and not merely provide a super sterile and very soulless environment. Let's think for a moment about washrooms in the workplace. The first area a visitor will usually experience in a workplace is reception. The second place many of us will go on visiting an office building is the washroom. An impression will be created, good or bad, so washrooms can provide the perfect opportunity to present a stylish, well-designed space. Done right, it can reflect a positive image of the company, and for staff, it can also offer an area of respite and sanctuary, which can help boost morale. It's the place where people can escape to after a challenging moment, or where they go to prepare for big meetings. So if the office space is the stage, then the washroom is very much the dressing room. And that is why the modern office washroom should not be designed as a purely functional zone. With our brains processing around 10 million pieces of information per second, it also needs to be a relaxing space to unwind in, if that's only even for a few moments. By combining innovative products and intelligent design with materials and colors inspired by nature, the washroom can help to restore the natural balance of our senses. The key to achieving this is biophilic design, which is an increasingly popular approach and which considers everything from the surface textures and patterns to air quality and ventilation. Acoustics and lighting considerations can also provide valuable opportunities to deliver sensory spaces. Now, as we know, humans' ability to detect sound helps us communicate and can also inform how we behave. However, we do need to be able to escape from noise when necessary, and the washroom can be the perfect place to do that. Managing the acoustics within the washroom is key to creating a calm atmosphere, and there are several ways to ensure noise is minimized within that space and in the areas surrounding it. For example, we can lift the WC off the floor using a frame to minimize structural sound transmission and install a system with an insulating cover and a quiet fill valve. We can choose a room-free WC with a soft closed seat and consider an asymmetric bowl to help dampen the sound of the water hitting the bowl on flush. We could also install acoustically optimized drainage made from a high-density material to help contain the sound of the moving water within the pipes. You could also lag the pipework if necessary. By decoupling the WC frame from the structure of the building and putting it within a duct space, we can provide further sound insulation. We could also use an installation set between the back of the pan and the duct, forcing a separation of the two hard surfaces. And using acoustically optimized brackets also will help to reduce structural sound transmission. Now, how are we able to potentially optimize the washroom from a visual perspective? Well, the main consideration here is light. We need light to see, but harsh, flickering fluorescent lights can be problematic, and low-level ambient lighting can be very impractical. So in workplace washrooms, creative lighting is crucial because very often these areas don't have a lot of natural light to work with. The aim in designing the ideal washroom should be to create a calm, considered environment using natural lighting wherever possible, or delivering the illusion of it through careful selection of materials, patterns and colors where there is little natural light available. Mirrors or mirrored cabinets can help create a sense of space by reflecting the light around the room. From a hygienic perspective, it could be worth considering automatic lights to reduce the touch points in the area. And on the slide, you can also see some examples where presence detecting orientation lighting features on enclosed systems. Of course, if you're going to minimize the light levels in the space, hygiene becomes an important consideration. There's several infrared flush plates on the market, which also operate on presence detection and can help keep hygiene levels high. Building Regulation Approved Document M makes provision for visually impaired people in accordance with the Equality Act of 2010, where, for example, adjacent materials are required to have a 30-point luminance difference between them in order to be compliant. Washroom odors are very often dealt with by masking the bad smell with a scented spray. But the latest innovation in odor extraction technology treats this problem in a very, very different way. Products have been developed that can extract the air from the space, pass it through a carbon or ceramic filter, which neutralizes the unwanted odors. Once this is done, the clean air can then be gently breathed back into the room, ensuring a genuine odor-free environment. There are shower toilets and standard WCs on the market now that are equipped with odor extraction, which is integrated into the bowl. Incidentally, the shower toilet that you see in the main picture there has an orientation light below, as well as that extraction factor. Likewise, there are flush plates available that extract odors through a carbon filter contained behind the actual flush plate. And they also have a light which shows the user when that filter needs to be replaced. In high traffic washrooms, ensuring that WCs and urinals have an automated flush after every use means there are no unflushed toilets in the area, and also no buildup of uric acid in the urinals to actually cause the odors in the first place. If an employer provides showers for employees who might cycle to work, it's very important that the traps are easy to get to and simple to keep clean, so that you're stopping odors from accumulating due to soap scum and hair, etc. An understanding of the importance of touch has allowed washroom designers and manufacturers to explore and adapt the ways in which we interact with spaces, and also with the materials and the technology within those spaces. And there are several design decisions that we can make in order to ensure that bathrooms are both user-friendly and either more or less tactile. Soft touch flush plates are very easy for physically impaired people to use. Even more effective are presence detecting flush mechanisms, which are touch-free and therefore very hygienic. They can also be programmed to ensure that each WC is flushed automatically after every use, as I mentioned earlier. Similarly, touch-free water delivery is both a hygienic and a water-saving option, ensuring that no taps are left running overnight or at weekends. In addition, for people who lack tactile sensitivity, infrared mixer taps with preset temperatures can prevent scalding injuries. Remote control operation can take all of these things to a completely different level as well. And when it comes to cabinets, quiet hinges and drawer rollers are very kind on the ear. Innovations in surface technology now are able to provide smooth, easy to clean surfaces, which promote a more efficient movement of the water around the products. The temperature of the material is also very important. Materials that remain at room temperature are less disturbing to touch. To that end, heated toilet seats are becoming increasingly popular and offer maximum comfort for the user, particularly in colder climates. If showers are being provided for employees, the slip resistance of materials in those areas is, of course, another essential consideration. So with a greater focus now on physical and mental health, as well as general well-being, to help combat all the stresses of modern life, good design in the washroom space could be the key to unlocking better balanced lives for all of us. Good washroom design can help provide reassurance to employees who are returning to the office and offer them a safe, comfortable space. So it's critical for designers to make full use of this opportunity. I'd like to conclude with a few slides about Geberit. The Geberit Group is the European market leader for sanitary ware products. It was founded in 1874 in a little village, Rapperswil-Jona, which is just outside Zurich in Switzerland. And Geberit has a long established reputation for delivering premium quality products along with innovative design. With more than 12,000 employees in over 40 countries, the Geberit Group generates net sales of £2 million and continues to deliver year-on-year growth. The group has maintained a strong local presence in most European countries and operates out of 35 production plants there. As a group, Geberit reinvests a percentage of its annual revenue into research and development in these 10 areas. Now, fire protection may initially seem to be the odd one out in that list, especially considering we're discussing bathroom design. But given that you will usually have stacks passing through slabs, fire collars will be required, and so it becomes an important consideration. R&D is very important to us as a company, because when we understand the interface between all the different products that we manufacture, we are able to demonstrate the compatibility between these various products through system testing. And Geberit is unique within the industry in that it built a sound laboratory in 1997. The structure is made up of 3 separate buildings, decoupled from the ground, as well as being decoupled from each other. It's 4 stories, and it enables us to investigate the sound emissions from our own products, and also allows us to explore the impact of different installation techniques on acoustics as well. This demonstrates Geberit's commitment to sensory testing and technology, which leads us neatly back to the topic of today's discussion. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you for attending the session today, which I hope you have found useful.
Thanks, Lynn, for that. We've had a very specific question in, which is, instead of auto flush after every use, in terms of sustainability, could waterless urinals and low flush toilets be considered an option?
Yes, definitely. There are waterless urinals on the market. Having said that, when you have pipework attached, you do actually want some water going through that pipework, purely because if you don't, there's a maintenance issue around changing cartridges, which might capture the uric acid. And if that uric acid finds its way into the pipework, you do want to be able to flush that out. So there are pros and cons to that. In terms of low flush WCs, absolutely crucial. Generally speaking, you can start off with a 6 and 4 liter flush, so that the full and half, and that would be standard, and that can then be reduced, and that is being driven really by BREEAM to have less and less water going through the system. So you can then reduce it down to 4.5 and 3, and you can reduce it even further down to 4 and 2.6. So yes, the low flush is key. And again, we need to consider the drainage that's associated with the WCs, because having less water going through it means potentially 2 things. A, you don't get as an effective flush purely because of the shape of the bowl. And then secondly, you may actually create blockages in pipework because there isn't enough balance between the amount of air and water in the pipe to actually effectively clear. So there are pros and cons, but yes, both those points are very, very important.
Thank you very much for that. We'll save the other questions until the end, because I now want to move on to our final speaker, Joe Hare from White Red Architects, and he's going to talk to us about some of the projects involved in his practice's mission to make people excited about going to work. So thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much to Architecture today for allowing us to talk on this very interesting subject. We are White Red Architects, as mentioned. We're based in Shoreditch. We do quite a lot of work on projects, on office projects, where wellness is obviously a key part of them. And a lot of the time, those are the technical aspects of wellness for a big tech company that we do quite a bit of work for. But obviously, we can't talk about that in such detail today. So today, I'm going to talk about, I think, a far more interesting idea, which is that of how workspaces can potentially change the way we feel, and by doing so, therefore make offices more attractive to their users. And the first project I wanted to talk about was ask the question, could workplace design make you feel more connected to the purpose of an organization? And the idea here is about a shared mission, feeling control, participation and collaboration, a bit more ownership of the process of the company that you work for. A little bit like the famous story of 2 masons asked what they were doing. One said that they were cutting stone, the other said they were building a cathedral. This idea of being part of a shared mission. And this project was for a famous manufacturer of buses who were taking a new warehouse and office space. And we were looking to essentially break down the barrier between those 2 functions. This company has over 100 years experience. It has an amazing heritage story, an amazing view to the future. And it was a case of trying to break down the physical barrier between the wall between the office and the workshop to show that collaboration and to showcase that mission. So we inserted this, you call it, I suppose, a space of purpose between the 2, which showcased the old buses, the new technologies that were being used, and it interacted very much with the office and the workshop on the other side. So you would have a space that showed the heritage and the new technologies. You would see it, and it interacted from the warehouse side. We could hear the noise of the warehouse activity, all of the workshop activity in the museum and exhibition space. And you had windows in from the workshop side into it. But you also had views into it from the office space and from the breakout spaces. So you felt connected from both sides. And we ended up with a space that I think showcases the mission and the looking to the future that the company has, and makes people that visit there, work there, feel proud, in control, and inspired by the company's direction. And this project's about to start on the site. So that's what's coming up. The second project asked the question, can workplace design create memorable moments in the day? And I think this one, this slide, I think accurately shows just how much we needed memorable moments in the day. This is obviously Oxford Circus in the middle of lockdown when everyone was working from home. And I think everyone can identify with the feeling that days were passing without event. And I think offices going forward need to address that. They need to create memorable moments in the day so that you feel like you've left and come back. And so this project was just around the corner from Oxford Circus, is a refurbishment of this building on Cavendish Square. And we wanted to focus on the people that were passing in and out of the building every day, making something memorable, a spectacle for the people that were coming in through reception. So when you came in at the beginning and you left at the end of the day, you had this moment. And we turned to theatre design as a memorable people spectacle, something that you go and you don't tend to forget, and looked at the mechanisms that theatre design used for achieving that. And we realized actually there were a lot of similarities between our space and typical theatre space. We had a stage in the center. We had galleries, which were the mezzanine around our space. We had the audience, which was the street outside. We had a big glass frontage where you had great views in. And we had the backdrops of the walls behind. So that informed the way we thought about the spaces. We thought about a layered sequence of spaces. And that would allow us to make the activity the spectacle. And we focused on one key part of this being the chandelier as a main prop within that stage that everything would be organized around. So the reception desk and all of the activity would be organized around. And the effect is that you are getting all the lighting is down to the ground rather than up as it was before, and it shines a light on the activity of the people passing in and around the space. Or as I say, all organized around this central chandelier and a view from the gallery. And this project's on site at the moment, due to complete in a few weeks' time. And I think this view kind of shows the scale of it. So hoping that chandelier and the scale of the building should make for a memorable moment as you come in and out of the building every day. The next project asked the question, could workplace design create a place of work and a destination in the mind of the user? So a space that you actually remember you recognize actually as the destination that the office actually has. And spec offices typically are white boxes and fairly anonymous. So this is, I think, quite an important challenge to try to overcome. You don't want to alienate future tenants, but at the same time, you need to give the workspace its own character. And this was the space we inherited before the renovation. This is an office building in Covent Garden on Henrietta Street. And Covent Garden is, of course, probably one of the most characterful places in London. So there's plenty to draw on. And in a way, crazy to think that you're coming to work here, your place of work doesn't share any of these character, it doesn't recognize the fact that it's in such an important historic location. So we looked at the detail of Covent Garden, the London Transport Museum, for example, and we took shapes and colors from from the surroundings and brought them into the the building as a whole, but critically into the first space you come into off the street, so the reception, as an extension of the public realm. And we brought in, so you're seeing here the colour in the floor and the curtain, you're seeing shapes on the wall. And we also made sure we organised the furniture to provide generous oak dining table that would allow people to encourage people to stop and have meetings and collaborate, and also focus on the individual aspects. So you'd have human scale patterns, so you felt like there were individuals could come and work as well. And getting the detail of that right was critical, testing against the colours in Covent Garden, and many tests were done. And we had to carry that detail through to all of the spaces to ensure that that same hand came through the whole thing. You felt that that every part of the building supported this character. And of course, that meant bringing it also to the office floor plates as well. And for the office floor plates, we looked to remove the existing ceiling and install these factory finished racing green ducts with golden swirl top hat diffusers as quite a distinctive element of the ceiling, all held behind acoustic rafts, and also brought that into the furniture as well. So the breakout areas had that same character coming through them. This is the office space. And I think one nice feature of the building, which you really noticed at the end, was that even from the street, you were able to see through into those arches again. And actually, if you're standing in this spot, you can look left and you see the arches of the London Transport Museum. So it's a nice visual link between the two. And the last project I wanted to talk about was actually our office. And I suppose similar to that of the space for the bus manufacturer, this space for us is all about a sense of purpose and pride in our work. And when the pandemic struck, we were packing up from our previous workspace, and we were sharing at the time, and the company we were sharing with was closing the office down, and we were thinking, well, we won't have an office for a while. It doesn't make sense. Everyone's going to be working remotely. And we discussed this together with the team, and the resounding feedback was, no, we need an office. Even if we're not going to go, we need this space that represents what we are working on. And so we looked out for a workspace. We found this shop front in Shoreditch, opposite where we were already, as a nice opportunity to have something interactive with the public. It allowed us to use the street directly outside for our spray booth in this case. And I think critically, I mean, as designers, we're quite privileged, I suppose, to be able to design and inhabit sometimes the spaces we've worked on. And critical to this space was that we would bring our process and our mission, I suppose, to the front of that. The idea of the office as a lab, the idea of having our workshop right at the front. It was a collaborative space where we could showcase the work. People would pass, members of the public would pass and see what we were working on. People do, and they knock on the door and ask what we're working on. But crucially, as we come in every day, the team come in every day, you're always passing by someone working on something, or the printer's going, or someone assembling something. So that sense of purpose is every single time you come in and out of the building, which makes for, I think, quite a nice collaborative space. I feel like we will feel we've got ownership over the process and sort of a shared direction, which I think it makes it far more collaborative. And so that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. I love the way you've anchored those projects in their cultural and architectural context. But as you say, you have been quite privileged in that you're designing in very rich historic neighbourhoods. I guess the obvious question is, how would you approach a really boring anodyne office plate in a out-of-town business park somewhere very anonymous?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's I think every well, every place, wherever an office is based, can have its own unique character from the area it is, or every village has its own history. And I think this is the big thing that's been drawn into sharp focus with the pandemic. We all have our homes, which are, familiar to us, and obviously typically lovely places that you feel safe. And when you leave and you're going to a destination, that destination has to have its own specific, unique character. And if it doesn't have that, then you're struggling, I think, to attract people out of their homes to come back to a place. So it is really important that even if it is out of town, that you are drawing on the fact that that location has something specific and you're reflecting it in the design.
I feel like that's a challenge to us all now, to find somewhere with nothing to pick up on at all. But in the meantime,
Yes.
I'm going to invite the other speakers, Chiara, Ben, Carol and Lynn, to join me, and we're going to take some final questions from the audience. Ben, I think this one is for you. Somebody's saying, is there still a place for the 1970s office cubicle in modern office design? What's your view on that?
Oh, visually, they can be moved. They can be put in a cupboard. But I mean, acoustically, they can be very good if they're made of acoustic materials. And actually, I do see some nice modern takes on them now. So there are about. Solid screens, you're still going to need an acoustic product above, because you're just going to get this huge buzz of sound buzzing around your cubicle. So you need to try and absorb the sound in the space so it's not channeling down into your cubicle.
Okay, thank you for that. Chiara, I think you're probably the right person to put this one to. Should the end design decisions depend entirely upon the people that you're going to accommodate and be tailored to their personality type?
No. So I think there are lots of considerations. I think tailored to their personality type, I'm not quite sure. I think tailored to the task that they're doing and their preference for doing that task may be. So personality types will influence to a certain extent what we do, but we also have collective well-being to think about, and the fact that we don't all work just in isolation, we do work as part of teams. So I would say no in terms of personality, but yes in terms of the work that is done, what's important in that work, and how the team, the collective, would like to do it.
Joe, there's a related question which I'm going to put to you, which is about how you hit the balance between the overall office concept and people's need to personalize their space. And we've had a question which is sort of asking about the tension between a very kind of clean overall concept, but actually I think it's also interesting in the light of some of the things you're doing, because obviously you're going in and stamping a very kind of personal touch on things. But actually, people need to feel they've owned it, don't they? So how do you accommodate those things, the individual and the overarching concept, together?
Things are going to be more flexible in the future. People are going to work from home more. And then perhaps that is the cubicle in a way of the future, in that that's the area that is personalized, that is yours. It is going to be the place that you're going to be sitting and getting most of the work done without distractions, although maybe people at home don't necessarily feel that. But I think that it's more important actually that it obviously has to be incredibly people focused, the actual office, and it needs to really make people feel comfortable and able to give their best and feel part of the process. But key to that is that whichever company, when you choose to work for a company, you look for a company that ideally shares your values and there's a mission that you buy into. I think it's far more important that that is a sort of an overriding characteristic that you feel that you have control over, than it is that you can personalize it with your sort of home environment, if you like, in the office. So it's more about collaboration, and it's more about working on a shared mission, and a home supports you in the way that you would have typically personalized your desk before.
Lynn, I'm going to ask you a question actually about the washroom and whether it's now become the kind of the princess rather than the ugly duckling, if you like. I know when I was training, it was the classic year out kind of punishment, really, or initiation, which was the reflective ceiling plan in the washroom. But you're talking about it as this, amazing sanctuary. has COVID actually just pushed it up the agenda now?
I think the need for the workplace washroom to be more than a functional place or space has always been there. And yes, I think you're right. I think the pandemic has definitely pushed that up the agenda in terms of importance. But creating a space that is not purely functional, I think it can do a lot for staff morale. It can boost staff morale if it's a lovely area. It's a space to relax in. It can also say a huge amount about the culture of the company. And that is reflected to staff and also to visitors, which I think is probably equally as important. So I think that need has always been there, and the opportunity to actually fulfill that has always been there, and now it really is coming to the fore.
Okay, Carol, we have a huge and challenging question for you, but give it your best shot. So, with a completely blank canvas and unfettered by planning issues, what does the perfect workplace design look like and incorporate today?
I think if you think of just about the fundamentals of what humans need, daylight, fresh air, views to nature, you start with that. And a lot of buildings actually don't have that. Using, the passive principles of design, and then that will also be more energy efficient, and the air quality will be better as well. And then I think in terms of the perfect space probably is one that starts out quite flexible, because I know from past experience, sometimes spaces that are over-designed don't allow the occupants to make decisions and evolve the space themselves. So I think a workplace that allows for some personalization or to support different and changing cultural events is an ideal space.
Well, on that note, I noticed that you said you've been working on the project you presented for 10 years. So presumably the consultation and the design predated lots of our findings about sustainability and also, of course, the pandemic. So I wanted to ask, is there anything you would do differently today if you were approaching that project again?
Oh, that's a big question. I'm sure there is. It's such a complex project. I don't feel there's any one thing that sticks out. And I feel until we actually do more research with the end users about how it's functioning, we won't know exactly what really should have been done differently. So I don't have anything on the top of my list. I would say it was highly studied and visualized, so there weren't many surprises when the building was actually built. I've never been involved in a project that's been so immersive in terms of how we modeled it and visualized it. So it was very well thought through. But I'm sure there could be changes.
Okay, thank you. And Chiara, we've got one last question. And I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but I'll try you. Do you know what the impact on productivity and results of working from home is? Or do you really just focus on well-being and happiness?
So there's a lot of research on this, so it's quite difficult to give you a definitive answer. And I suppose part of the answer is to remember that a lot of research has been done in the last couple of years when we've not really been working from home. We've been forced to not work in the office. So a lot of the headlines that you're hearing recently about pandemic working from home, I think, have very limited applicability to working from home more generally when we have control. Typically, what people tend to do when they choose to work from home, so work in a hybrid way with choice, is you see improvement in terms of specific activities that require concentration and focus. But you do, from a well-being point of view, see the advantages of working somewhere communal. So there is a lot of research. There are some advantages there, but for specific activities rather than broadly for productivity. And also I would caution against extrapolating too much on the research that has been done during the pandemic, because we've not really been working from home. We've been forced to not work in the office, which is different.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to have to end it there. So thank you very much to all of our speakers for giving us so much to think about. Chiara, Carol and Joe, and of course to our sponsors, Lynn Clapham-Carter of Geberit and Ben Hancock of Oscar Acoustics for their support as sponsors, but also for sharing with us their expertise. Thank you all for joining us and for your questions. If we didn't get to answer your question, please make sure you've left an email address and we'll try and get back to you. I hope it's been useful, and I hope to see you again soon.